This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Questions orales, oral questions. We're going to have
the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The lawless hate riot that we saw on the streets of Montreal is what happens after 9 years of a woke Prime Minister pushing radical woke identity politics, dividing people by race, gender, vaccine status, religion, and more. On top of dividing, he erases our heroes and history, saying Canada has no core identity. He opened the borders to terrorists and lawbreakers. The results? Assassinations on Canadian soil, firebombings and terrorist attacks against places of worship, 251% more hate crime. It wasn't like this before this Prime Minister and won't be after he's gone. Why not an election so we can fix what he broke?
the Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I personally believe that it is shameful that anyone would speak of the violence that took place on our streets here in Canada in political terms for purely partisan political intention. Mr. Speaker, I believe it is all of our responsibility to stand up to such hatred and to condemn it in the strongest possible terms, unequivocally and on behalf of all decent Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After doubling housing costs and inflating food prices 37% faster in Canada than in the United States, with inflationary carbon taxes and deficit spending, the Prime Minister now has a tiny 2-month tax trick that will save you 10 cents on a pack of chips, save you a few pennies on a Christmas tree, but only after your Christmas tree is already up and decorated. You'll even save on Halloween costumes 2 months after Halloween. Does he really expect Canadians to fall for this tiny tax trick just before he quadruples the carbon tax on heat, homes, gas, and groceries?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm really glad the Leader of the Opposition started by comparing our economic position with the U.S. Because the fact is, in Canada, inflation is lower. In Canada, interest rates are lower. In Canada, deficits are lower. And in Canada, the public debt is lower. Let's stop talking Canada down. And when it comes to supporting Canadians, what I want to know is, will Conservative MPs be allowed to offer a tax break to their constituents? I know their constituents want it. That's what we're hearing from everyone.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this from a minister who, after finding out that the economy is entering its 6th consecutive quarter of shrinking per capita GDP, that's income per person, down, while the American income per person is up. After she learned that there are 2 million people lined up at food banks, 38% more chronic homelessness, 1,400 homeless encampments in Ontario after 9 years of this government. She says we're not in a recession, we're in a vibe session, she says. So what's her message to people who are hungry and homeless after 9 years of her government? They just need to get with the vibe?
Exactly.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Speaker, my message to the Leader of the Conservatives is to be a little more economically literate. I guess he didn't look at the recent GDP revisions, the upward revisions in GDP that show a good result for Canada in per capita GDP. They also show that Canada has not had a recession, contrary to the predictions of many when we saw the COVID recession. We have had a soft landing. That's something to celebrate.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
The NDP leader is giving Canadians whiplash with his latest flip-flop and the flop on the flip. First, he said he tore up his deal with the Liberal government. Then he said that he had taped it back together because they had signed on to his 2-month tax trick. Now he rises on his feet to say that the trick is a rip-off of seniors and persons with disabilities. So then why won't he put his actions where his words are and vote for a carbon tax election so Canadians can choose between this 2-month trick and axing the tax for good.
It will be of no surprise I'm going to ask the honourable member from New Westminster Burnaby, please, not to take the floor unless recognized by the Speaker. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the only inconstant flip-flopper in this House is the Leader of the official opposition. For months, he has been talking about how Canadians need a little more support. But it turns out that unless you recite robotically his Dr. Seuss rhymes, he's not going to agree with your approach to helping Canadians. Now is the chance for him and his MPs to actually give Canadians some real support. Let's get together.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
The streets of a major Canadian city were set on fire this weekend and the Prime Minister was nowhere to be found. A radical, anti-Semitic, anti-Canadian mob burned cars, smashed windows, assaulted police officers, and the Prime Minister was nowhere to be found. It took him until noon the next day, and he offered the most basic platitudes resembling some standard condemnation that he's been offering after fomenting the hatred that he's now surprised about. So I have one question. When was the Prime Minister told about the riot, and why did he decide to keep dancing the night away?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague, the Minister of Defence, I think properly explained the outrage that all Canadians felt at this wanton, reckless violence on the streets of Montreal. Mr. Speaker, we condemn unequivocally the rising and concerning rates of anti-Semitism and all other hate crimes in the country. We're working with provincial authorities, local police to combat this. And let me be very clear, Mr. Speaker, no matter what group you claim to represent or what cause you're advancing, if you're smashing windows and assaulting Canadians, you're a criminal and you'll face the full consequences of the law.
Again, I'm going to ask the member from Calgary. I'm going to ask the member from Calgary, Signal Hill, please, not to take the floor unless recognized by the chair. The honourable member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Answer clearly shows the minister's economic illiteracy. As GDP per person has gone down, that means Canadians are getting poorer. And nobody loves this Liberal NDP Prime Minister more than the U.S. He drove our jobs, our investment, our business to the U.S. and now Canada is poorer than Alabama. That's why more than 2 million Canadians are in a food bank in a single month and 1 in 4 Canadians are skipping meals. Instead of letting bankers worry about the economy, call a carbon tax election now so common sense Conservatives can fix the budget and this country.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as I say, I really urge the member opposite and all Conservatives to consult those GDP revisions, including their impact on GDP per capita. They will see we have had a strong economic recovery with inflation down and interest rates down. And that's why now is the time to give Canadians a little bit of extra help. With a GST break over the holidays and a rebate for working Canadians. And that is what the Conservatives should support us in offering to Canadians. It's really astonishing to me that they refuse to do that.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, I will let the bankers worry about the economy. You'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy. The budget will balance itself. These are the actual words of the Prime Minister of Canada. Given his complete disinterest in managing the economy, no one should be surprised that GDP per person has declined in 8 of the last 9 quarters. Mr. Speaker, it's time for a common-sense Conservative Prime Minister who will fix the budget, fight inflation, restore the promise of Canada. When will the Prime Minister finally give Canadians a say and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
A working class Canadian voting for these Conservatives would be like a chicken voting for Colonel Sanders, Mr. Speaker. Think about it. We want to build an economy that works for everybody. When we raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% to cut them for 9 million Canadians in the middle class, they oppose those measures. When we stop sending childcare checks to millionaires to put more money in the pockets of 9 out of 10 Canadian families, they voted against it. Now we are proposing to cut taxes on household items that are going to help families and workers in this country. Yet again, they oppose it. I urge my colleague to drop the talking points, get over the stickers and caucus with whatever he's about to read, and get on with supporting households.
The honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
I urge the member to get on with Canadians' business and call a carbon tax election. After 9 years, according to The Economist, Canada is now poorer than Alabama, the fourth poorest state in the U.S. While this Liberal government drives our economy further and further in the ditch with excessive taxation and regulation, the Canadian economy falls further and further behind while the American economy roars ahead. When will this government get out of the way and allow us to restore the promise of Canada by calling a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
It is like we are playing bingo here, the number of slogans that are being read off when people can't take their eyes off the sheet. Listen to this, is from an article recently. Conservatives talking about their own leader. If you repeat the slogans, you get rewarded. You are celebrated in front of caucus for being a good cheerleader. The difference between us and them, I don't have to hold...
Order! The Honourable Minister, start from the top this time, please. No interruptions.
Mr. Speaker, the difference between the Liberals and Conservatives in question period, I don't need to have my notes in front of me to actually speak in the House. Mr. Speaker, they are being rewarded in caucus when they repeat the slogans in this House, not when they defend their communities at home. The honourable member won't even admit that his community would be better off receiving money for housing. He stands up and votes against measures once and twice and 3 times to deny tax breaks to families in his community. We are going to be here to support working families. I wish for once the Conservatives would join us.
The Honourable Member from Durham.
Mr. Speaker, for years, these Liberals have engaged in woke virtue signaling. They have promoted a hollow and superficial understanding of morality, more concerned with appearances than doing what's right. And Canadians clearly saw the consequences of Liberal ideology over the weekend in Montreal when hate-fueled attacks overtook the cities. The Prime Minister is partying while Canadian cities are suffering. So I ask, why was the Prime Minister dancing while Montreal was burning?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for that question because all Canadians in this House and all Canadians around the country detest and render unacceptable what we saw in the streets of Montreal. That kind of violence, that kind of unlawful behaviour, that kind of anti-Semitism is unacceptable and will never be countenanced. While we're talking about the fight against anti-Semitism, I will just put it to that member that we have legislation on the floor of this chamber that will take the ban on willful promotion of anti-Semitism and accentuate the penalties, taking them from 2 to 5 years. Will the member support that bill? It's called Bill C-63. It targets online radicalization, which is the root cause of what we're seeing.
The Honourable Member for Durham.
This Liberal Justice Minister, just like his boss, the Prime Minister, refuses to take any responsibility for creating the conditions that led to what we saw in Montreal just a couple of days ago. It's this Liberal Justice Minister's DEI criminal justice policies that have allowed crime to go unchecked in our cities. It's this Liberal Justice Minister that won't lift a finger to do anything about the violence targeting religious communities in Canada. The Prime Minister is the problem. The Liberal Justice Minister is the problem. So I ask again, when will the Prime Minister stop dancing and address crime in our cities?
Great question. The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I reject that out of hand. What I would say on this side of the House is that what we are doing is we are working to ease tensions in our communities. We are looking at the statistics on hate crimes. We're seeking to address them. What is the proof positive? When I announced the Bill C-63 in this chamber, who was standing by my side, Mr. Speaker? The people that were standing by my side included the Center for Jewish and Israeli Affairs. Why? Because they know you don't get a Pittsburgh Tree of Life synagogue attack unless you're radicalized online. Radicalization online is causing anti-Semitism. It is what we will combat through this bill, through every measure on this side of the House.
It's the internet.
Before I give the floor to the Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly, I would like to...
Members, especially colleagues, I'd like to remind members, including the member from Durham who had asked the question, to please not take the floor, to listen to the answer that he had just asked.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, I was going to ask the Minister of Finance what went through her head when it came to giving tax breaks to people who in theory could be millionaires, or $250 checks to people who are making $150,000. But here I'm struck. Is it possible that they're taking us out on for a ride and that the government doesn't actually have the support of the NDP? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I sincerely hope that we will have the support of every member of this House, because I know that there are things that divide us, but I think that all of us believes that we need to support the middle class across the country. So yes, I hope that the NDP will vote in favour of these measures. I also hope that the Bloc will vote in favour of them, and I hope that our colleagues from the Conservative Party will vote in favour as well.
The Honourable Member from Cumberland Colchester.
The word cacistocracy translated means government by the worst, most incompetent or most unscrupulous citizens. I can't think of a better description for this NDP Liberal government. There have been 27 reported cases of scurvy in Saskatchewan, and the Salvation Army has reported that over 1/4 of parents are skipping meals so their children can eat. Canadians are malnourished and suffering, and what do we get from this government? A quadrupling of the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre. When will the Prime Minister finally show some courage and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, it's a shame that members would speak to each other in that kind of way. I believe that every member within their heart is here because they wish to serve their communities. And you know, I take a look at Canada, which the average number of years the Canadians spend in health is 6 years longer than the United States, 2 years longer than the United Kingdom, 1 year longer than France and Italy. We have the second highest only to Japan. The model they would choose would be to push us deeper into mal health and attack our health system. Mr. Speaker, that's not a direction we will follow.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member from Cumberland Colchester.
Speaker, under that Liberal minister, 7 million Canadians don't have access to primary care, and malnutrition mayhem reigns supreme. 2 million Canadians visiting food banks, 40,000 of them being Nova Scotian, and of those 12,000 being children. And scurvy. Can it get any worse, Mr. Speaker? And how does this NDP Liberal Reunited Costly Coalition think they're going to address food bank use and scurvy? Well, of course, as I mentioned, they want to quadruple the carbon tax. I'll ask again, when will the Prime Minister let Canadians decide if they want the madness to continue, and will they call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, their solution to food insecurity would be to take away a rebate check that they get to give them more money in their pocket to be able to afford the necessities of life. Their solution to food insecurity would be to cut a school food program that makes sure that kids get the food they need. They would cut dental care. The reality is, I sat in opposition and I watched the Conservative Party when they were in government. I'll tell you, at that period of time, the amount of action they took for vulnerable people was exactly zero. So for now they're talking about what vulnerable people need, but they're not putting forward any solutions to actually help them.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member from Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, the cost of living crisis is having a major impact on family grocery budgets. Yet the Liberal answer is to continue hiking the carbon tax, making food even more expensive. Under NDP Liberals, we're seeing the largest annual increase in child poverty on record. 1 in 4 parents are cutting back their food to feed their kids, and 1 in 5 children are now living in poverty due to the NDP Liberals government. That's nearly 1.4 million children. Enough is enough. Will the Prime Minister give Canadians a choice and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I have a great deal of respect for the MP from Fort McMurray, and that's why I'd like to ask her and all of her colleagues, who I believe sincerely do care about Canadian families, to join us in supporting Canadian families. And here's how they can do it. Vote for a GST rebate over the holidays. That would mean no GST on diapers, no GST on kids' clothes, no GST on that prepared food, maybe rotisserie chicken, that a hardworking mom wants to pick up after work to feed her kids. That is real support we can all deliver in a couple of weeks.